everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you're tuning in from. My name is Leslie Lamb, and I'm the host and producer of the Crypto Unstacked podcast. And I'm really excited to be back as a guest host for another episode on Real Vision. And this is part of our mini series discovering the space about the metaverse and digital fashion. Today, I am joined by a force of nature, Charli Cohen. Charli, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. Great to be here.
Charli, you've been addressing the metaverse, as it were, since 2013, or the multiverse, however you want to call it, and taking physical fashion into the digital world. And you said before that one of your goals is to allow anyone to take their identity with them to any part of this so-called multiverse. So I think that's a pretty massive statement, and I'm not sure everyone can comprehend this term right away. So let's start off by talking about this grand ambition of yours, right? And we'll take it back to how things got started for you in the fashion space.
Sure. So I guess taking the grand ambition, I think that the ideal situation is where we don't have this barrier between our physical identity and our virtual identity, because the way that we live our lives, there isn't really a barrier. We don't think like, okay, I'm going to do like IRL time now, and no, I'm going to do screen time now. You don't separate it in that way. I think when you're socializing with people, when you're chatting with people, you don't really separate it out in that way. So in terms of how you are able to represent yourself visually, that should be equally fluid and not something that you have to think about too much. And in the same way, in the physical world, where you will invest in your visual identity, because you know that there's a utility to that. You're like, okay, I can wear this to in these situations, to these events, and so on and so forth. It's the same in the digital world, that there needs to be a value to owning digital assets, and that really comes with being able to actually use them in as many different places as possible. So that's really the idea when I'm talking about people being able to represent themselves seamlessly wherever they're socializing and existing. And going back to the beginning, certainly the beginning of working more in the digital space, I started the Charli Cohen brand back in 2013. So prior to that, I'd started my first fashion brand when I was 15 to kind of learn the ropes of how to run a fashion business. I went to university and got my fashion degree. And by the time I left, I was very, I guess, jaded by the traditional fashion industry, very uncomfortable with it from a sustainability perspective, from an inclusivity perspective. And I guess taking the inclusivity part of it, I really like the idea of digital world building and how I could create a brand where part of it was about the clothes, but a huge part of it was about having a space that, you know, any of the community could engage with each other, engage with me, engage with the brand, and really something that was a counter to the very gated exclusivity of luxury fashion. So I guess quite early on, I got to start experimenting with AR and VR, trying to find alternatives to traditional fashion weeks, which we were doing as well, but being able to create these digital events that anybody could participate in, and that was very sort of visually inspiring and exciting, and something that really people hadn't been able to have access to before unless they were within these exclusive fashion circles. And from there, I started working more with the gaming industry and really seeing the opportunity around digital assets as well as just digital experiences. So started looking at wearables and avatar customization. And through that, I discovered NFTs really as a way to be able to bring more utility to virtual fashion. So we've been able to do these experimental projects where we could work with specific game spaces and create skins, wearables for these particular spaces, but it had no utility outside of that particular space. So I really like the idea of there being some kind of solution to that. And through 2020, being in this position where we could create digital events and digital fashion, we were in a great position to do all these big brand collaborations because we had something that they really needed at that time, having had to cancel all of the physical activations and a lot of the physical production that they had planned for the year. So we got to really experiment and start playing around with these different technologies, different ways of combining digital and physical fashion, and having different digital utilities. So through the last, I guess, year and a half, we've collaborated with Reebok, with Assassin's Creed, with Sanrio, with Pokemon most recently. And we've been really able to delve into how we can create this hybrid digital physical experience. Pokemon probably being one of the best examples, where we worked with a sort of big multi-brand luxury retailer in London, Selfridges. We had a physical pop-up in there, which basically served as a portal through into this virtual city that we'd created around the Pokemon IP to celebrate their 25th anniversary. And through the virtual space, we sold both digital fashion that had utility across the metaverse, and also physical fashion as well, which had sort of augmented reality integration so that you could point a smartphone at a physical garment and it would unlock an AR filter.
Incredible. Let's unpack that entire journey. So we've ended, just talking about one of your biggest projects, and we'll definitely dive deeper into that. Let's go all the way back to when you were 15, because not everyone has a very clear path when they set out at that young age, right? Saying, this is what I want to be doing, and actually doing something about it, right? We all have ideas. I want to be this, I want to be that. But then there's always this sense of, well, I need to go through schooling. I need to go through this experience, intern here, get this early job, and then eventually I will be able to start my own thing, right? That's typically how I think people who want to become entrepreneurs maybe, course their path, if you will. So your journey with fashion started at 15 with you founding a company. I mean, what influenced you back then to say, you know what, now's the time?
Well, I think there were a couple of big contributing factors. One being that I'm sort of very lucky in that my parents and most of my family are entrepreneurs. So that's something I've always been exposed to. And I've never really had any fears around it, or I guess the same sense that it's a huge risk to take that maybe someone would have whose family are in more traditional work. So there was that barrier that already I'd never had to experience. And then the other piece is that when I was 13, I left school for 2 years and sailed from the UK to New Zealand with my mum and stepdad. Basically had this huge lifestyle change. And really during that time just got to create. So, I mean, a lot of the time we were in port, but whilst we were at sea, sometimes for stretches of 4 to 5 weeks at a time, I'd be writing, I'd be sketching, I'd be figuring out kind of what I wanted to do when I arrived, and had the benefit of being in one physical location for a length of time. And I was already really obsessed with fashion, so I started off kind of designing like, oh, this is when there are shops again, this is what I want to buy for myself. And really by the time that I got to the other side in New Zealand, I had solidified the idea that fashion was what I wanted to do. And then in New Zealand itself, it was a much easier school curriculum than it had been in the UK, even having taken 2 years out. So I had kind of extra time on my hands. I saw locally that there were sewing and pattern cutting classes available, so I just enrolled myself in those. And really just decided to go for it, because I knew even at that time that design would be just a really small piece of the puzzle. And I wanted to learn like how to build a supply chain, how to sell wholesale, how to market stuff, how to fill out a tax return. And it seemed like it was a great opportunity to be able to do that before going and doing my formal fashion training, because again, like from what I knew about fashion school, which was definitely accurate by the time I went there, is they don't teach you that much about the business side of things. So I just wanted to take the opportunity whilst I felt that I had it.
Hey, if you like this clip, be sure to check out the full interview and more only on realvision.com/crypto. It's 100% free. Sign up now.